The morning fog drifted slowly across the valley, soft and pale like a thin blanket laid gently over the land. It clung to the cliffs of the old stone quarry, sliding over the rough gray rock walls before settling on the still water below. From above, the quarry looked less like an industrial scar and more like a silent lake hidden deep within the earth. But the people of the valley knew better. For years, the quarry had been abandoned after a violent storm flooded its massive pit. Pumps had tried to drain the water at first, but the basin was simply too deep and the underground springs too strong. Eventually the machines were hauled away, and the quarry that once provided stone for roads and buildings across the county became nothing more than a quiet body of water surrounded by broken machinery and rusting equipment. Most people called it a waste of land. Some called it cursed. And now it belonged to Clara Bennett. She stood at the edge of the quarry that morning, her black coat pulled tightly around her against the cold air. The wind brushed gently across the water, sending small ripples across the glassy surface. Clara stared down into the flooded pit as if trying to see the past buried beneath the dark water. Just a week earlier, the land had belonged to her husband, Daniel. Now Daniel was gone. The accident had happened suddenly in the forest north of town while he was helping a logging crew move fallen timber after a storm. A heavy trunk had shifted unexpectedly, crushing him before anyone could react. The news had spread quickly through the valley. Daniel Bennett had been known by nearly everyone. He was the man who still believed the old quarry could one day work again, even after most people had written it off as a failure. Clara swallowed quietly as she looked across the silent water. Daniel used to stand exactly where she was now, pointing down toward the deep basin below and explaining his plans to restore the quarry. He had pages of sketches and calculations stored in his office at home. Plans he would never finish. The sound of a truck approaching along the gravel road broke the quiet. Clara turned slightly as a dark pickup rolled to a stop behind her. Two men stepped out, brushing dust from their jackets as they looked toward the flooded quarry with careful interest. They were not from the valley. That much was obvious from their clean boots and pressed shirts. One of them walked toward her with a polite expression. "Mrs. Bennett?" he asked gently. Clara nodded. "Yes." The man removed his hat respectfully. "We're very sorry for your loss." She gave a small nod but said nothing. The second man stepped closer, glancing down into the quarry basin. "We heard the property transferred to you after your husband's passing." "That's right." The first man folded his hands calmly. "We represent a development company from the city. When we heard about the situation, we thought it might be a good time to speak with you." Clara already knew where the conversation was heading. The quarry had been attracting attention from outside investors for years. But most of them didn't want to restore it. They wanted to erase it. "What do you want?" she asked quietly. The man gestured toward the flooded pit. "This land could be difficult for you to manage alone. The pumps, the safety maintenance, the insurance." Clara looked back down at the water. The quarry was enormous, nearly 40 acres wide and deeper than most buildings in town were tall. Maintaining it would indeed be difficult. "We'd like to offer to buy the property," the man continued. Clara didn't respond immediately. Instead, she crouched near the edge of the stone ledge and picked up a small rock, letting it fall into the water below. The splash echoed softly against the quarry walls. "What would you do with it?" she asked. The second man shrugged casually. "Probably fill it in. Level the land. Maybe build storage lots or warehouses." The words hung in the cold air. Fill it. Bury the deep basin beneath dirt and concrete until nothing remained of the place Daniel loved. Clara slowly stood up again. "No," she said calmly. Both men blinked. "I'm not selling." The first man frowned slightly. "Mrs. Bennett, a flooded quarry has no income value." Clara looked down into the But Daniel had spent years studying that basin. And in the last few nights, while reading through his notebooks and maps, Clara had discovered something hidden in his research. Something that suggested the flooded quarry might become far more valuable than anyone imagined. She turned back toward the two men. "My husband believed this place still had a future," she said quietly. The developers exchanged doubtful looks. Behind Clara, the silent water of the quarry reflected the cloudy sky. To everyone else it was just a flooded pit. But deep below the surface lay the beginning of an idea that could change the valley forever. In the weeks that followed, Clara Bennett spent more time at the flooded quarry than anywhere else in the valley. Each morning she arrived just after sunrise, when the light touched the high stone walls and the water below looked almost silver in the quiet air. Most people assumed she came there to remember Daniel. In truth, she came to finish what he had started. At night, long after the town went quiet, Clara sat at the wooden desk in Daniel's old office. The room still smelled faintly of dust, paper, and engine oil from the years he spent studying the quarry's machinery and rock formations. His notebooks were stacked in careful piles across the desk. Dozens of them. Clara opened each one slowly, turning the pages filled with Daniel's handwriting, numbers, sketches, measurements, and small notes written in the margins. Many of them described the quarry's depth, the strength of the stone walls, and the underground springs that had filled the basin with water after the great storm years earlier. At first it looked like nothing more than old research. Then she noticed something unusual. On one page near the back of a notebook, Daniel had drawn a detailed cross-section of the valley. The drawing showed the winding river that passed through town, the farmland stretching along its banks, and the high ridge that separated the river from the quarry. But what caught Clara's attention was the line Daniel had drawn between them. A tunnel. Next to it, he had written a short note. Emergency overflow diversion. Clara stared at the page for a long time. The valley had suffered from flooding many times before. When heavy storms came down from the mountains, the river swelled quickly and spilled over its banks. Farms were ruined, roads washed away, and sometimes even homes filled with muddy water. The town had tried building higher levees, but the river kept finding ways to escape during the worst storms. Daniel's drawing suggested something different. Instead of trying to hold the river back, what if the extra water had somewhere else to go? Clara flipped through more notebooks, searching for anything connected to the idea. She soon found several more pages filled with calculations, measurements of the quarry basin, estimates of water volume, and notes about controlled floodgates. The deeper she read, the clearer Daniel's plan became. The flooded quarry could act as a giant reservoir. During major storms, excess river water could be diverted through a tunnel into the quarry basin. The deep pit could hold millions of gallons safely below the valley floor, preventing the river from flooding homes and farmland. It was a bold idea, but the numbers made sense. The quarry was deep enough to store enormous amounts of water. Clara closed the notebook slowly, her heart beating faster. Daniel hadn't just been dreaming about reopening the quarry. He had been planning something much bigger. The next morning Clara carried the notebooks back to the quarry itself. Standing at the edge of the stone cliffs, she studied the surrounding land carefully. The river flowed less than half a mile away, hidden behind a ridge of rock and trees. From where she stood, it wasn't hard to imagine a tunnel cutting through that ridge and connecting the river to the quarry basin below. She knelt near the edge of the stone ledge and watched the dark water far beneath her. The surface was calm, but she knew how deep it truly was. Deep enough to hold the water that threatened the valley every storm season. Later that week, Clara walked into the town council building carrying Daniel's notebooks and a large folder of maps. The council members gathered around a long wooden table, looking curious as she spread the papers out before them. One of the older men leaned forward. "What exactly are you proposing, Mrs. Bennett?" Clara took a steady breath. "I believe the quarry can protect the valley from flooding." Some of the council members looked confused. Others looked skeptical. Clara pointed to Daniel's drawings. "If we build a controlled tunnel from the river to the quarry basin, excess floodwater could flow here instead of into town." The room grew quiet as the council members studied the maps. One man rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "You're saying the quarry could store the floodwater?" Clara nodded. "Yes." Another council member raised an eyebrow. "That would make the quarry one of the largest reservoirs in the county." Clara looked around the room calmly. "And it's already built." The council members exchanged uncertain glances. Outside the windows, the quiet valley stretched beneath the cloudy sky. For years the flooded quarry had been seen as a failure. But Clara was beginning to see it the way Daniel once had. Not as a problem, but as the solution the valley had been searching for all along. By the time autumn arrived, the quarry no longer looked like the forgotten pit people once avoided. Heavy machinery moved steadily along the rocky ridge between the river and the quarry basin, drilling into the stone day after day. Workers in hard hats and bright safety jackets guided equipment, poured concrete, and carefully measured every inch of the tunnel that slowly pushed its way through the hillside. Clara Bennett visited the site almost every morning. She stood quietly near the edge of the quarry, watching the progress while the cool valley wind carried the distant sound of drilling across the water below. The surface of the flooded pit still looked calm and silent, but now it had a purpose far greater than anyone once imagined. At first, many people in town doubted the project. Some believed it was too expensive. Others weren't convinced the quarry could truly handle the force of floodwater rushing from the river. But Clara had spent months working with engineers, checking Daniel's calculations again and again. The numbers never changed. The quarry basin was deep enough, strong enough, large enough to hold millions of gallons of water. If the system worked, the valley might finally escape the cycle of floods that had plagued it for generations. Late one evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains, the final steel floodgate was lowered into place at the entrance of the tunnel. The massive door was designed to remain closed most of the time, but when the river rose too high, it could open and redirect the rushing water safely into the quarry basin. The workers stepped back, admiring the finished structure. For the first time, the plan was complete. Now all they could do was wait. The test came sooner than anyone expected. Just 2 weeks later, dark storm clouds rolled across the mountains and heavy rain began pouring into the valley. At first the downpour seemed like any other autumn storm, but as the night continued, the rain grew stronger. By morning, the river was rising rapidly. People gathered along the riverbanks, watching the muddy water climb higher against the levees. Farmers moved equipment away from the low fields, and shop owners in town nervously placed sandbags near their doors. Everyone remembered what had happened during past storms. The river always won. Clara stood near the tunnel entrance beside several engineers and town officials as they monitored the river level. The water roared past them, stronger than usual, pushing against the banks with frightening force. One of the engineers studied the measuring gauge. "It's reaching overflow level," he said. Clara nodded slowly. "Then it's time." The workers activated the floodgate controls. With a deep metallic groan, the heavy steel gate slowly began to rise. Within seconds, part of the raging river changed direction. Water rushed into the tunnel opening, disappearing into the darkness beneath the ridge before emerging at the quarry basin on the other side. From the high cliffs surrounding the quarry, the sight was astonishing. A powerful stream of water poured through the tunnel outlet and cascaded into the deep basin below. The flooded quarry began absorbing the incoming flow like a giant bowl carved into the earth. Hour after hour, the system continued working. Instead of overflowing into the valley, the excess river water filled the quarry basin. By late afternoon, the storm finally began to weaken. The river slowly dropped back to its normal level. The flood had been stopped. The next morning, sunlight broke through the clouds and spread across the valley. People walked outside their homes carefully, expecting to see flooded roads and muddy fields. But the valley was dry. For the first time in years, the river had stayed inside its banks. Later that day, dozens of townspeople gathered near the quarry to see the system that had protected them. They stood along the rocky cliffs, staring down into the deep basin where stormwater now rested far below. One of the town council members approached Clara with a smile of quiet amazement. "You did it," he said. Clara looked down at the water filling the quarry, reflecting the bright sky above. "We did it," she replied softly. The abandoned quarry that once seemed like a useless inheritance had become something far more important. A shield for the valley. A promise that the floods would never again destroy the homes and farms of the people who lived there. And as Clara stood beside the water Daniel once believed in, she knew his dream had finally found its purpose.